Episode 4.
Coming to you live from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. This is CVS. And now here's your host, David Ross.
Welcome to episode 4. This is going to be sort of like a test run at the new, longer 30-minute format. And I've got the new graphics up. I've been working on them for a while. Just like a hobby, doing the 3D graphics using Blender. I'm going to show you some of that because I find it interesting. I don't know if you will, but it's 3D graphics. I use Blender, which is free. Maybe I'll hop over right now and show you my Blender setup for that. But yeah, it's a 30 minutes now, so I can take my time and ramble a bit. Maybe I'll talk about, I don't know what I'm going to talk about because I haven't planned anything. I'm just doing this to get my feet wet. But let's go over to the desktop and see Blender. You can see here I've got the setup with a microphone and the mug and computer and the crucifix. A couple of images. We've got some images of the recent popes here. Actually, I can show you. I've got a nice 3D sphere set up, which pretty cool. I can zoom in. I can show you. This is like interactive image here, 360 degrees. I got my little mouse pad there. CVS. Got my recent popes to show that I'm not a sedevacantist. Of course, I've got St. Peter there. I've got Noah there because they're very important to me. Holding the keys to the ark. There's Our Lady of Perpetual Help. This is all, of course, just 3D graphics. There's a famous painting by Stephen Lochner. I think that's how you pronounce it. There's a nice little crucifix that I found. These are all 3D models. Even the keyboard, the mouse, everything's 3D models, even the chair. You can just find these things online for free, and if you can't find it, you can make it. I found, for example, a generic mug for free. I just slapped on my logo. I built obviously the keyboard and mouse I got for free off the internet, these 3D models, but I got myself, I built the mouse pad. It's not much of an item to build, very simple to build, but a couple of things I built. I built the table. And of course, I built this whole environment here, not the HDR. This is a church in Poland, a really beautiful 14th century church. It's built in it's the Cathedral of St. John. It was built in the 13th century, burned down, and they rebuilt it in the late 14th century. And beautiful, beautiful church in Poland. It's the cathedral, St. John's Cathedral. But what we're looking at here is sort of like a hallway, and these walls, actually, I built these walls, and it's basically an extrusion of the IHS monogram that I use. And I think there's a little Easter egg here. I think we have IHS up here on the ceiling, not on the ceiling, but on this decorative piece in the church. And yeah, it looks like an IHS there. You can see the little cherubim. I don't know what this writing is. I'm not sure what these images are here. I'll probably do a tour. Here's a nice sculpture of a saint. I'll probably do a virtual tour of St. John's Cathedral. And the name of the town in Poland where this is situated is Turin or Thorn. Here's a little Easter egg I found. Here's a bottle. I don't know if it's a bottle of water or a bottle of alcohol, I'm not sure, but beautiful, beautiful vaulted ceilings in this church. What we're seeing is a lot of reflected light here from the stained glass. There's stained glass on this wall over here, but what we're encased in is a glass piece that I constructed. I just invented this sort of glass case in which the IHS logo is. I'm going to take you over and show you some images now. Okay, this is the early days when I was starting with Blender back in 2018. I wanted to build a maze, so I got this little silver ball. I have an HDR, which is a sort of a panoramic background for lighting. You can see the trees and the sky reflected in the ball. This is the maze that I started to build with a black rubber floor and white plastic or laminate walls. And I was going to have the ball animated moving through this maze, and that project didn't turn out because it was just a little bit too complicated. But I was playing around with the walls, different sizes, turrets on the walls. Here are different materials that I was playing around with. And those 6 different segments here, I was going to have different segments in my live show where I would just sort of break the show up into different themes. So I was going to have different materials for different balls that would pass through the maze in between each segment. It was really overthinking everything at that time. Here we are when I first started building the IHS monogram. And I put it on a table. There's a little silver ball there. But it was fun trying to make the fabric. It was a bit of a challenge. I had to apply some sort of ocean filter to the material. This is a sort of a spooky, dark scene. I put some ghost lights within the IHS logo. I was going to do a sort of a nightmare scenario where scary demons and goblins were popping out around every corner as the camera moved its way with a spotlight, and sort of moving around surreptitiously in the dark. And then the music was going to get triumphant and the lights would come on in the cathedral and you could see everything. This is a top-down view. I nixed obviously all these fancy ideas I had about walking around in the dark with a spotlight. It was a nice idea, but it's just too involved. But here's an outside view of this sort of cage unit that I built. And you can see there are 6 sides to this hexagonal, whatever it is, this structure that I built out of a sort of soap bubble treatment on glass. I did that so that you could see, you could actually see that it was glass. I applied sort of like a soap treatment to these glass panels. And I cut out, I inserted the balls, I inserted the rods between the balls to give it some sort of structure. And then I decided to have these 6 windows on top. You can see the letter M here, the letter A here. And if you look closely, you can see little axles where I was going to have these things rotating and the camera would fly through them, and each of the 6 different segments of my live show. But I've since abandoned that. It's too complicated. Here's a different view of the same structure, and here's just an early test shot I did. You can see my mugs in a different position there. Here's a different shot, a different placement of my popes, the recent popes. I'm always harping on how important it is as a Catholic to submit lovingly and respectfully to the living magisterium. So I'm very fond of the recent popes. Make a point of having them present. Here's just a still shot. But if we go over to Blender now, I wanted to sort of show you how this works. I can, in the animation, you can see, well, I don't want to get too detailed about it, but you can see there's a lot of different controls we have. This is my camera here in a yellow box, and I can actually move around. If I do Control F, I can actually move around here. I can Shift F, I can fly around. Why is it not working? Okay, something's not working. Must be in a different mode. Let's go over and look at a different unit. Okay, that seems to be bugging out. Won't save. I'm just going to reopen that because it crashed for whatever reason. Blender, it's free software, it's excellent. Always starts out with a little cube here, but I'll just open the file that I had open. Show you sort of how it works. So here I am I'm in fly mode, and we can sort of fly around. This is my initial starting point in the scene. And then I was going to do that scary thing where we drive around through the maze and there'd be goblins and demons coming out. But I can also turn off the gravity and can actually fly up Now, in any of these positions where I am, I can switch to a different view, which is more beautiful, but I don't see the controls for that right now. But it's not rendering as it would finally render. But if I were to hit F12, I could get a render started. So that's how the 3D graphics work. And it takes a long time to render these 3D graphics. To make a video, you need to export the images one by one. It takes a long time, and then you can actually use Blender to create a video and do video editing. So here's a view of what I was working on last week when I put together the new intro video. You can see I can just scan through it. Got a magenta screen, which operates like a green screen. And so it's just like any video editor, but it's free and it's very easy to use. There's lots of help online. And so I've had a lot of fun doing that. And at the end of this 30-minute vlog, you're going to see another segment of video, which I inserted at the tail end. And it's the magenta screen that's allowing me to see other stuff, because otherwise it's on the top layer of my broadcast system. So I'm just scrolling through the 30 minutes now. I'm going to show you at the very end. I've got another set of music and different image sequences that I outputted from Blender, and then I sequenced them here and created the video. So that's just a little bit of technical background, show you how that works. And this is a 3D view. The nice thing with creating a panoramic 3D 360 image like this is you can actually reduce it to a sphere. It looks like a sort of a glass ball with an image in it or on it. And you can zoom in, and there's a mode where you can go to default position and rotate slowly. So I'm thinking in the future, I might use this technology because it's so powerful to set up a space much like the medieval scholastic philosophers imagined in their minds, and some of them sketched out on paper. But with this technology, we can go a lot further, because we can actually have spaces like mnemonic spaces. And in the Middle Ages, this was sort of the way that they would map out memory, complex memories, whether it had to do with philosophy or theology or natural science, anything. You can map it out to a 3D space, and you can have a place for that memory, these different loci. So it's a technique in the Middle Ages for memorization, how to access information. You place it in a 2D space or a 3D space. But what I'm thinking of doing is using it as an apologetics tool. I can have a world, a 3D world that I create using this powerful free software, Blender. And I can actually go ahead and zoom in on a piece of information that corresponds with someone's location on a diagnostic map, because I'm very fond, of course, of categorizing people's worldviews. Why do I do that? Because I want people to think about their worldview. I want them to escape from their false worldview. Obviously, I want everyone to take a step in the right direction, to move closer to the truth. And by having a sort of diagnostic map in a 3D space like this, of course it would be radically different from this, but this is just an example of a 3D space that we can move around. I could be having a conversation with someone, and I could have a piece of information or a diagnostic map where their position on free will, for example, would be over here. And then if in the course of the discussion we have some sort of modification, we could shift over to the adjacent implication, and so on and so forth. I mean, this image obviously doesn't correspond with what I'm talking about. It's just an idea. But when I was looking at this powerful software and how easy it is to create, it takes time to create. This took a lot of time to create, but it's easy to set it up. You need computational power to crank out the high quality graphics. So it does take time, but conceptually it's very easy to lay out the 3D space. You know, like I just got this microphone for free off the internet. I chose my surfaces, I chose my colors, I chose the scale, the rotation, I slapped it on the table. The table is simply an extruded plane, and that plane is going right through the wall. So this is very easy to slap together a scene like this. So conceptually, it's very easy to slap something like this together, and I think it'd be very useful as a learning tool and in conversations where we're always going over the same terrain over and over again. If I'm talking with an atheist, if I'm talking with a non-Christian, if I'm talking with a non-Catholic Christian, there's so many areas where apologetics has been well established, and yet we're reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. So I want to map it out, and I want to have a world where we can move in, move out, zoom in, zoom out, and pan around and make progress in a very visual way. And I'm excited about this idea. I'll have to play with it, I'll have to think about it, and I'll have to come up with some sort of a schema. But that's the basic idea of the 3D graphics. I'm really excited about it, and like I said, I see potential for Catholic apologetics, and even for Christian apologetics, and even for apologetics generally with monotheism, bringing atheists out of their atheism and into monotheism. So what I'm going to do now, since I have the time, I've given myself an extra 10-15 minutes here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and finish what I started in a couple of these vlogs. And so that's going to involve going back to my Kindle. A lot of you might find this boring, but I'm doing it for posterity. I'm doing it for myself so that I can know what books I have, which books I'm excited to read, and eventually I'd like to go through some of the comments, because the books that I have read, I've got a lot of comments, not comments, excuse me, highlights where I've highlighted the pertinent sections. So let's just jump down to 4 last things. I've got a book on hell, a book on purgatory, and a book on deathbed conversions. Haven't read any of them. Oh no, I have read the deathbed conversions. Didn't find it that fascinating, but it was okay. It had a couple of people in there. It had Oscar Wilde. I'm a big fan of Oscar Wilde. I like the fact that he was a bad boy, you know, bisexual or whatever, and he turned his life around. He came back to his wife and he apologized, and he sought forgiveness, and he was contrite, and he died a good Catholic. I'm a firm believer that he was truly contrite at the end of his life, and that his deathbed conversion was real. I bought the complete works of Oscar Wilde, I think, after having read this book. Now we're getting into some really meaty and juicy stuff on my Kindle here. The Documents of Vatican II. This translation isn't the more common translation. It's Walter M. Abbott, S.J. He's a Jesuit. I've heard pros and cons of the different translations, and from everything I read, I just went with this one. I mean, I do happen to like the Jesuits. I know they're controversial, but I do like the Jesuits. I don't like the rebellious wolves in sheep's clothing. I'm not going to name any names, but I do like the Jesuits in general. I love St. Ignatius of Loyola, for example. But a wonderful book. I find the translation good, but I haven't read the other translations, so I can't compare. But an excellent set of 16 documents, all 16, and their commentary. There's commentary by the author, obviously, but there are commentaries by sort of some of the people that were invited to Vatican II, like Protestants and rabbis and stuff like that. So well worth the read. I've got a lot of highlights I'd like to go through with you, but right now I'm just going to plow through what I've got on my Kindle. So here's a book called Tumultuous Times. It's pretty much an anti-Vatican II book, but I wanted to get that, give that side of the story a read. I think I started to read it and I got bored and I moved on. Catholic priests falsely accused. I don't know why I classified this under Vatican II, but I guess it's because The abuse scandals seem to follow after Vatican II. Probably a connection because Satan was all riled up after the council. The smoke of Satan famously entered the church, and a lot of abuse cases. But I think it's getting under control. I'm not sure about that, but I've heard things that it's more or less under control. Yeah, so very touching reading about priests who have allegedly been falsely accused. Of course, you never know, right? You never know. We'll find out at the final judgment. So I just got a live chat from Lord Mozart 308. He says, "Not watching the game?" ? No, I'm not watching the game. No, I'm not watching the game. I'm not even sure what the game is. It might be American football. I was just I was out tonight and I saw American football blasting on the large screen TVs. But no, I'm not interested in the sports. Thanks for asking, though, Lord Mozart 308. Thanks for watching. So moving on here, we've got Vatican II. What happened at Vatican II? John W. O'Malley, S.J., another Jesuit. Okay, I did read that. I'll have to look through my highlights to see what I highlighted in that. I can't recall. The Pope, the Council, and the Mass. James Licoudis. I'm not sure if I've read that one yet. A concise guide to the documents of Vatican II. Yes, I have read that. I'll have to go through the highlights on it. I think it was good. History of the First Council of Nice. Okay, I probably bought that just to sort of get a compare and contrast of a well-respected council with a controversial council, Vatican II. So to compare sort of the history of a well-established and well-viewed council. I haven't read it yet, though. Great Heresies, Hilaire Belloc. Not sure why I bought that. Might be interesting, might not be, not sure. Mass Revision, How the Liturgy is Changing and What It Means for You. Jimmy Akin. These are always very light reads. I find Jimmy Akin to be a very light read usually, but usually pretty solid, I find. Now, this is my last category, and it is Writings by the Saints. So we've got the Life and Revelations of Saint Gertrude the Great. Haven't read it yet. I'm excited to read it. I do pray the Saint Gertrude prayer multiple times per day, so that's probably why I bought that. Francis of Assisi in His Own Words. This one really blew me away. I was fascinated reading this one. I read it maybe 6 months ago. Yeah, I was quite shocked with his radical approach to poverty. It sounded like I was reading a Protestant when I was reading Francis of Assisi. I'll be honest with you. It sounded very Protestant. And I've since come to know and love the Franciscan school in terms of philosophy and Bonaventure and different people in that, Blessed John Duns Scotus. That Franciscan school is very interesting. I find it very interesting philosophically and, of course, theologically. And the absolute primacy of Jesus Christ is the key notion theologically and philosophically that I'm attracted to, and I think that's one of the highlights of Franciscan thought. I'm no expert, obviously, but that's something that stands out to me, the absolute primacy of Christ. And I was very shocked by his radical poverty and his sort of lone wolf approach to Christianity. But very interesting. Shocking, but interesting. Very few writings, actually, that we have that survive of St. Francis of Assisi, but definitely worth the read. Here we have something by St. Bridget of Sweden, The Prophecies and Revelations. Haven't read it yet. The 7 Capital Sins. Everything I've read by Fulton Sheen, Blessed Fulton Sheen, I've really enjoyed. I enjoyed listening to him. I enjoy watching him. I like his face. I like his gestures. I like his theatrical presentation. I like everything about him. I've heard very few negative things about Fulton Sheen. I have heard a couple things, but nothing worth mentioning, just little quibbles. about his character, but yeah, I think he will be canonized. It's unfortunate what's happening with his body, but we'll see how things play out, and God's in control. The Life of Christ, Fulton J. and Sheen. I don't know, I've got 2 versions of that. Not sure. If I did buy these, if they were not free, they were probably 99 cents, $1.99, something like that. A Treatise on God, John Duns Scotus. Definitely have to read that. It's intimidating though, because it's thick reading. He's called the Subtle Doctor for a reason. I've got to start burning through this because my time is going to run out here. Francis de Sales. Looks like the complete writings of Francis de Sales. I'm a huge fan of St. Francis de Sales. Love the man. Very moved by him. I've read a couple things by him. I read The Sign of the Cross, for example. I've read Introduction to the Devout Life, or whatever it's called, something like that. Very, very impressed by that saint. Very impressed. Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body. This is interesting. I'd like to read that sometime. I have to make a confession. I don't enjoy reading St. John Paul II. I never have. I've always felt like it's too modern, too contemporary, too academic. I don't like his style. I love him because he's a saint. I love him because he's made in the image and likeness of God. He's a human being. I have to love him. But I haven't enjoyed his writing, so that's just a little mini confession. Get that off my chest. But I will read the Theology of the Body. I think it's important. And what I know about the Theology of the Body, I do agree with. Narak, A Path of Salvation Analysis. Okay, no idea what that is, why I bought it. It looks interesting. An Essay in Aid of a Grammar of Assent, John Henry Newman. Definitely want to read that. I was listening to a lecture series that mentioned it. That's why I bought it. Haven't read it yet. Just burning through. I've got a lot of books here. Gregory of Narak, St. Ignatius of Loyola, The Spiritual Exercises. I read parts of that. Alphonsus Liguori, How to Converse with God. Can't wait to read that. Another St. Alphonsus Liguori book. Another one. I've got, several here. Obviously, I'm a big fan. Read a couple of his things. My favorite was The Glories of Mary. The Letters of St. Jerome, I bought that because of my BFF. Shout out to you, Matthew, if you're listening to this. You're my BFF, and I got that because of you. Commentary on the Works of St. Bonaventure, another Franciscan. Look forward to reading that, although he's not that enjoyable to read, I have to admit. Prayer of St. Gertrude again. I've got so many books here, I can't get through them. St. Jose Maria Escrivá of Opus Dei. Treatise on Purgatory. I've got St. Louis de Montfort, of course I read that a couple times. Secret of the Rosary, amazing. More Alphonsus Liguori. Dark Night of the Soul, I did not enjoy that. St. John of the Cross. Ladder of Divine Ascent. This I bought because of the Lisney brothers. If you're listening to this is a shout out to you. I'm going to read that. Look forward to your podcast, which is going to be all about this. And Book of Meditations and Prayers. This is one of my all-time favorites, St. Anselm of Canterbury. It's a must-read. You've got to read it. And his meditations and prayers are so touching, so moving. St. John Bosco. I've got more Bonaventure. I've got a lot of Bonaventure. Wow. Constellations of Philosophy by Boethius. Never read it. Sounds very poetic and touching. Not a lot of talk about God in it, but a little bit. And of course, On Grace and Free Will, St. Augustine. I've got the complete works of St. Augustine, Summa Theologica, Thomas Aquinas. Lots and lots of good stuff. Thanks for being with me. Sorry I ran out of time, but we'll talk soon. God bless.
For as little as $1 per month, you can support the charitable mission of CVS, which has already enrolled hundreds of guests and patrons and their immediate families in the Scalabrini League of the Missionary Fathers of St. Charles Borromeo. By your generous support, you too participate in these benefits. A special Mass offered on each day of the year, and the devotion and good works performed by the members of the Society Thank you for your generous support.